There are things that Steve Harvey does that are not on the schedule. Most of what happens on a Family Feud stage is scheduled. The questions, the rounds, the fast money, the check. The format is the format, and the format has held for 30 years, and there is a reason it has held, which is that it works, and that working things are worth maintaining. But occasionally, in the specific, deliberate, I have decided to do this way that was different from the unplanned moments that also happened on the stage. Steve Harvey arranged something. Not a surprise in the impulsive sense. A surprise in the considered, I have been thinking about this, and I have made a decision sense. A surprise that required production's coordination, and a phone call made in advance, and a screen rolled to the back of the stage, and a conversation with a young man in a hospital in Atlanta who had been, at the moment of the phone call, standing in a break room between rounds and who had said yes before the sentence was finished, because he had been waiting for the right moment, and Steve Harvey had called to tell him the right moment was Tuesday. This is the story of that Tuesday. Of a woman named Dorothea who came to a Family Feud stage with her family, and who did not know that the most important person in her life was watching from 500 miles away, and that in the middle of the second round Steve Harvey was going to say 2 words to her, turn around, and that when she turned around she was going to see her son on a screen, and that what her son was going to say was the thing he had been trying to find the room for and had not found. And that Steve Harvey had found the room for him, on a Tuesday, in front of 300 people and the cameras, because he had listened to Dorothea's family describe her in the pregame and had understood immediately that the room needed to be large enough for what her son had to say, and that Tuesday was when the room was available. Hit that like button and subscribe right now before we go any further, because this channel is here for exactly these stories, for the moments when someone finds the room, and we come back with one every single week. Now let us talk about Dorothea. Dorothea Simmons was 58 years old and had been born in Macon, Georgia, and had spent her adult life in Atlanta, where she had worked for 31 years as a medical billing specialist at a large hospital network. Not the glamorous, visible, patient-facing kind of hospital work, but the specific, consequential, entirely necessary kind that happened in the offices and the back systems and the claims and the coding. The work that made it possible for the clinical work to be paid for and for the institution to continue. The work that required a specific, organized, detail-oriented. This must be correct quality, and that Dorothea had brought to it for 31 years with the specific, methodical. I have a standard, and I will not lower it competence of someone who had understood from the beginning that her job was about accuracy, and that accuracy in medical billing had consequences that were felt by real people, and that she was going to get it right every time. She had gotten it right every time, or as close to every time as 31 years of effort and attention could produce, and the result was a career and a reputation in the billing department of a hospital network that was built on the specific, undramatic, pointed at evidence of someone whose work held up under review, and whose judgment was trusted, and who had been trusted for 31 years because she had earned the trust in the only way trust was earned, which was by doing the thing correctly and consistently over time. She had raised her son James alone. His father had been present for the first 4 years, and then had been, in the specific, accumulated, one absence at a time way that some absences happened, progressively less present, and then entirely absent. And Dorothea had understood by the time James was 6 that the raising was going to be hers and had organized herself accordingly, had organized the finances, the childcare, the schools, the hours. The second job she had taken for 3 years when James was in middle school to save for what she had already decided his future was going to look like, which was college, which was a profession, which was a life in which James Simmons was going to be able to choose what he did based on what he was capable of and not based on what was affordable. She had made this possible. She had done it with the specific, daily, accumulated, entirely undramatic quality of someone who had decided what the project was, and who had been executing it one day at a time for 20 years, and who had not described it as a project, or as a sacrifice, or as a thing worth naming, because it was simply what she did, and what she did not require naming. It required doing. James Simmons was 30 years old, and was in his second year of internal medicine residency at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. He was, by the account of his attendings and his co-residents, and the nurses who worked the floors with him, excellent in the specific, foundational. This person is going to be a very good doctor way. Not the prodigy way, not the look at my board score way, but the way that mattered more and was rarer, which was the way of someone who had understood that medicine was not a performance of competence but a practice of attention, who listened to patients the way his mother had listened to him, who was in the room the way his mother had been in their apartment, fully and without reservation, and who had, in 2 years of residency, the specific, already building reputation of a physician who was going to be someone his patients trusted, and who was going to deserve the trust. He had been trying to say something to his mother for 3 years. Not for lack of trying, he said things to her regularly, called twice a week, visited when the residency schedule permitted, told her he loved her in the plain, direct. She raised me to be honest way she had raised him to say things directly. But the specific thing he had been trying to say, the full account, the complete articulation of what she had done and what it had produced, and what he wanted her to know about what it meant, had not found its form yet. He had tried it on his drive to the hospital more times than he could count. He had gotten close, in the versions he rehearsed, and the closeness had always been insufficient, because the thing he was trying to say was too large for the versions that arrived in the car, and the largeness required a room he had not yet found. When Steve Harvey called, he had said yes before the sentence was finished because a room of 300 people with cameras running was larger than the car, and he understood, immediately, that Steve Harvey had found the room. Dorothea's sister Marlene, 55, was a retired postal worker from Macon who had come to Atlanta for this trip, and who had the warm, direct, long-view quality of a sibling who had watched her sister carry the raising for 24 years, and who had helped in the available ways, and who had witnessed, from the closest possible vantage, what the carrying had looked like and what it had produced. Dorothea's co-worker of 20 years, Patricia, 57, was the person in the billing department who had been beside her the longest and who had the specific, 20-year, side-by-side quality of someone who had seen a person do the work every day, and who had a very accurate model of what that work was and what it cost and what it was worth. And Dorothea's neighbor of 12 years, Bernice, 62, who had been the one who had stayed with James when Dorothea worked the second job, who had been the person in the building who had watched James do his homework at Bernice's kitchen table on the evenings when Dorothea was at the second job, and who had been, in those evenings, one of the people who had made the project possible by simply being available, and by being the kind of neighbor who said yes without being asked twice. The application had been submitted by Marlene, who had done it because she had seen the show and had thought, Dorothea would be excellent at this, and also Dorothea deserves an afternoon where the room knows who she is. She had submitted it, and Dorothea had agreed when the acceptance arrived, and James had been told about the taping because James was always told about the things in Dorothea's life, and James had heard about it and had called Steve Harvey's production company. This last part was not how it usually worked. James had found the number and had called and had said, "My mother is going to be on your show, and I have something I have been trying to say to her for 3 years, and I think your show might be the right room for it." The producer who had taken the call had brought it to Steve Harvey's attention. Steve Harvey had made the call. James had said yes. The opposing family was the Morris family from Birmingham, warm, well-prepared, genuinely competitive, and going to find themselves in an afternoon that had more in it than they had anticipated. The pregame. Steve Harvey moved through both families with the warm, customary attention and arrived at Dorothea with the genuine, curious, what is the real story here quality he brought to people who were going to have something to tell him. He asked about the medical billing work. She described it with the warm, direct, matter-of-fact quality of someone who had been doing something important for a long time and who had learned to describe it in the plain language of what it was. "I make sure the clinical work gets paid for so the clinical work can continue." He said, "That is the infrastructure." She said, "Exactly." He said, "The thing without which the visible thing is not possible." She said, "Yes." He said, "Is that satisfying?" She said, "Yes." She said, "It is satisfying because it is consequential and because I do it correctly and because doing it correctly matters." He received this. He filed it. He asked about James. Dorothea introduced him with the specific, warm, organized, mother pride quality of a woman who had been describing her son to rooms for 24 years and who had things to say and who said them. He is in his second year of internal medicine residency at Emory. He asked, "What is he like as a doctor?" She said, "He listens." She said it in the plain, "This is the most important thing" voice. He said, "That's it." She said, "That is the most important thing." He said, "How do you know?" She said, "Because his patients tell me." She said, "I have had 3 phone calls in the past year from patients of his who found my number and called me to tell me that my son had listened to them in a way that they had not felt listened to before and that they were grateful." She said it in the plain, this is simply what happened voice without embellishment because the facts were sufficient and she did not add to sufficient facts. Steve Harvey was very still for a moment. He said, "Patients who did not know you called you to tell you that." She said, "Yes." He said, "To say thank you." She said, "To say thank you." He said, "To you." She said, "I think they needed to tell someone who had made him that way." He received this. He filed it. He knew what he was going to do. He asked the other family members about Dorothea. Marlene said, "She never asked for help, but she always helped when help was available." Patricia said, "She has not made a billing error in the 8 years I have been checking her work, which I stopped doing because there was no point." Bernice said, "She trusted me with her son, and that is the highest trust, and I have never forgotten it." Steve Harvey received each of these with the full present, noting everything attention of a man who had been given a picture, and who had understood what the picture was, and who had made the arrangements, and who was going to use the arrangements correctly. He thanked each of them with the warm, genuine quality he brought to things he genuinely meant. He moved on to the game. The first round was competitive and warm. Both families played well. Dorothea was excellent. The medical billing specialist's comprehensive. Accuracy first. Nothing left unchecked intelligence applied to survey questions with the methodical, organized, "I know the right answer and here it is" quality of someone who had been finding the right answer for 31 years and who was not going to stop finding it now. She was right at the rate that 31 years of disciplined attention produced, which was the high, reliable, "This person does not guess" rate of someone whose professional relationship with accuracy had produced, over time, the specific quality of a person who knew the difference between knowing and guessing and who never guessed when she knew. Marlene was warm and direct. Patricia had the colleague's precise, 20 years beside her accuracy. Bernice was warm and right in the specific 12 years next door. I have been paying attention quality of a neighbor who paid attention. Second round, third question. The game was close and well matched. Steve Harvey received the answer to the third question and then did something that was not on the schedule. He said, "Hold on for just a second." He said it in the specific, organized, "I have something I am going to do" voice that was different from the hold-on voice he used when something had happened that required stopping. This was deliberate. The game was not stopping because something had gone wrong. The game was stopping because something had been arranged. He turned to the production team at the side of the stage and nodded once, in the way that agreed-upon signals were executed, and a screen at the back of the stage came to life. James Simmons appeared on the screen. He was in his white coat. He was in a break room at Emory, the specific fluorescent tile floor quality of a hospital break room that was unmistakably what it was. He looked at the camera with the focused, prepared, "I have been waiting for this" quality of a young man who had rehearsed for this and who was also entirely past rehearsal and in the real thing. Steve Harvey said, "Dorothea, I need you to turn around." Dorothea looked at him. She received the instruction with the specific, slightly uncertain, what is happening quality of someone who had not been told to expect anything and who was reading the room to understand what was happening in it. She turned around. She saw James. Her expression did the thing that expressions did when they received something they had not been prepared for, the specific, sequential O and then O quality of recognition arriving layer by layer. The screen, the white coat, the face she knew from every angle, the break room at Emory, the prepared, waiting quality of him, the understanding of what had been arranged and who had arranged it and why. All of it in 3 seconds. She said his name the way she had been saying it for 30 years, which was the way only a mother said it, not his public name, not James, but the name that was only for her, and she said it in the voice that was the full weight of 30 years condensed into a single syllable. James said, "Hey, Mom." He said it in the warm, slightly undone voice of a young man who had been in the break room for 20 minutes preparing to say the thing and who was now in it, and who was still, at this very first moment, simply glad to be in the right room finally. Steve Harvey stood to the side. He was at the edge of what was happening. He was going to let it be what it was without managing it toward the next scheduled thing. He understood that his job in this moment was the room and not the narrative. He held the room. James said, "Mom, I need to say something to you. I have been trying to say it for 3 years and I have not found the right room for it." He said it in the organized, plain, "I have decided to say this" correctly voice of a second-year resident who had learned, from his medical training and from Dorothea, that the most important things deserved the most precise language, and that the precision required preparation, and that he had prepared. He said, "I want you to hear this in a room full of people because I think the thing I am trying to say is too big for the car. I have tried it in the car 100 times and I have not been able to make it big enough." He said, "This room might be big enough." Dorothea was looking at the screen. She was in the specific, full, nothing is being managed quality of a woman who had been managing things for 30 years, and who had arrived at a moment she had not been able to manage her way to because you could not manage your way to a thing that had to be received rather than arranged. She was receiving it. James said, I remember the years when you worked the second job. I remember being at Bernice's table and knowing you were somewhere else and knowing why you were somewhere else. He said, I was 9 years old and I understood why you were somewhere else because you had told me why. You always told me the truth. He said, you told me, I am doing this so that you can do what you are capable of. You said it in those exact words. You said it more than once. He said, I have been doing what I am capable of for 30 years, Mom. I have been doing it because you made it possible to do it, and because you told me the truth about why you were making it possible, and because the truth made me understand what it was worth. He said, I am a doctor because you decided I was going to be a doctor before I knew I wanted to be a doctor, and by the time I knew I wanted to be a doctor, you had already made it possible. He said, patients call you. You told Steve Harvey about that. He said it with a warm, slight, entirely real smile. 3 patients who found your number because they needed to thank the person who made me the kind of doctor I am. He said, I need you to hear that, not as a compliment, as a fact. You made me the kind of doctor who listens because you listened to me first. For 30 years, you listened to me first. The room was completely still, not the various stillnesses of the afternoon. This one. The specific, gathered, full-weight stillness of a room that had just heard a son tell his mother what she had given him. In the plain, direct, exactly right language that the thing deserved, in a room large enough to hold it, from a white coat in a fluorescent break room 500 miles away, on a Tuesday, because Steve Harvey had found the room. Dorothea was in it fully. She had her hand over her mouth, not performing the gesture, but doing it. The specific, involuntary, the thing is too large for the available expression gesture of a woman who had spent 30 years doing the thing and who was now in the room where the thing was being named and who had no management left and who did not need any. She was in it, in front of everyone, completely. James said, I want to say one more thing. He said it in the collected, organized, I have saved this for last voice. You never called it a sacrifice. You never described what you did as something you did for me at a cost to yourself. You described it as what you were doing, just what you were doing. He said, I have been a resident for 2 years, and I have been in rooms with families, and I have watched parents describe what they do for their children, and some of them call it sacrifice, and some of them call it love, and some of them call it just what you do. He said, you always said it was just what you do. He said, I want you to know that I know the difference. I know the difference between what is easy and what is just what you do. I know what you did. He said, I know what you did, Mom. He said it in the quiet, final, this is the most important sentence voice. I have always known. I want you to know that I know. Dorothea took her hand from her mouth. She said, James. She said it in the quiet, warm, I am here voice. She said, I know you know. She said it in the specific, settled. This has always been true voice of a woman who had raised a son who paid attention and who had always known her son paid attention and who was glad the room knew it too. She said, I know you know. She paused. She said, that is why I did it. She said it in the plain, direct, this is the complete account voice. I did it because I knew you would know, because you were the kind of person who would know. She said, I knew that from when you were very young. She said, I always knew. She paused. She said, go see your patients. She said it in the warm, organized, forward-moving, this is what comes next voice that was always her voice eventually, the medical billing specialist's voice, the get the work right voice, the just what you do voice. Go take care of your patients. She said, I'll see you Sunday. She said it with the specific, warm, we are regular in our contact, and that is correct quality of a mother whose relationship with her son was not an event but a practice. James said, yes, ma'am. He said it in the warm, this is simply how I address my mother voice. He said, I love you. She said, I love you too. She said it in the same plain, this has always been true voice as everything else, because love in Dorothea's household had always been stated plainly and consistently, and without ceremony, because ceremony was for things that needed to be elevated, and love did not need elevation, it needed saying. The screen went dark. Dorothea stood for a moment. She was in the specific, complete, just received something large quality of a woman who had been in the middle of a game show, and who had received, in the middle of it, the most important thing that had been given to her in a very long time. She turned back to the stage. Steve Harvey was standing at the center. He was in the room with what had happened in the full, present, entirely warm way he was when something real had been in the room, and when he was on the other side of it, and when the something real had been exactly what it needed to be. He said, I want to say one thing. He said it to the room, to the audience, to the cameras, and to Dorothea. When Marlene submitted this application, she wrote one sentence about you, one sentence in the box that asked why your family should be on Family Feud. Said it in the plain, organizing voice. She wrote, "My sister spent 20 years making sure her son could become a doctor, and she has never once described it as a sacrifice." He looked at Dorothea. "I read that sentence and I called James," he said, "because a woman who does a 20-year project and does not call it a sacrifice is someone whose son has something to say, and I wanted to find him the room to say it." He said, "That is what just happened." He said, "He found the room." He said the thing in a break room at Emory in 24 years of it in a white coat on a Tuesday. He said, "Because you raised him to say the thing correctly when the room was ready." He looked at the room. He said, "She raised a doctor who listens because she listened first, 30 years of listening first." He said, "That is the account. That is what 30 years of just what you do produces." He said it in the plain, reporting, "This is the full account voice." He looked at Dorothea. He said, "Are you ready to play?" Dorothea looked at him. She was doing the thing she always did eventually, the specific, organized, forward-moving, the work is what comes next quality of a woman who received things and then did the next thing. She was not entirely done receiving it yet. She was close. She said, "Give me 1 second." She said it in the quiet, direct, "I am telling you what I need" voice of a woman who had always said what she needed. She breathed. She looked at Marlene, who had submitted the one sentence and who was looking at her sister with the specific, warm, "I wrote it because it was true expression of someone who had described a thing accurately, and who was watching the room confirm the accuracy." She looked at Patricia, who had the clean, certain expression of a co-worker who had been right about a person for 20 years, and who was watching the room find out. She looked at Bernice, who was in the specific, full "I was at the table" expression, the kitchen table, the evenings, the second job, the boy doing his homework, and who was receiving the afternoon with the quiet, complete "I was there" quality of someone who had been part of the thing and who was in the room where the thing was being received. She breathed. She looked at Steve Harvey. She said, "Okay." She said it in the organized, "I am ready" voice. "Let's play," Steve Harvey said. "Let's play Family Feud." He said it in the warm, forward-moving, "the game continues" voice. He said it with the warm, slightly bright-eyed quality of a man who had done something he had decided to do, and who was glad he had done it, and who was now doing the next thing, which was the game, and the game was the right next thing. The game resumed. What it became was the game of a team that had been somewhere together, and that was doing the next thing together with the weight of the somewhere making the doing fuller. Dorothea was extraordinary in the specific, released, forward-moving, hands-are-free quality of someone who had put something down that they had been carrying, and who was now playing with everything available. She was accurate. She was right. She was fast in the efficient, nothing wasted quality. The medical billing precision applied to survey questions with the same just what you do competence that had been the competence of 31 years. The board confirmed her answers with the consistent, unbiased frequency of a board confirming correct answers, which was the only frequency the board used, and Dorothea produced correct answers with the same reliability she had been producing them since before James was born. Marlene was direct and warm. Patricia was precise and right. Bernice was the warm, long view, "I have been paying attention" quality of someone who had been paying attention for 12 years and who was good at it. The Simmons family won the main game. They won it in the specific way of a team playing together with something to play for. Fast money. Dorothea walked to the podium. She walked to it with the same walk she had been walking for 31 years. The specific, upright, forward-facing, just what you do walk of a woman who had been doing the work at the standard, the work required for a long time, and who brought that walk to this podium in the same way she brought it to everything else. Steve Harvey looked at her from across the stage. He said, 31 years, second job, patients who called to thank you." He said it in the plain, full account voice. "He knows what you did." He said it with the warm, direct, "This has now been confirmed" quality of someone delivering information that had just been verified in the largest possible room. He said, "Show this room what 31 years of just what you do looks like in 20 seconds. Dorothea said, "Start the clock." He hit the Dorothea Simmons answered 5 Family Feud survey questions in 20 seconds with the warm, methodical, entirely accurate intelligence of a medical billing specialist, who had spent 31 years ensuring that the right answer was the answer that went on the form, and who had applied this standard to every question in every room for 31 years, and who applied it now to the 5 questions on the board with the same organized, unhurried, entirely reliable quality. The quality that did not guess when it knew, and that knew most things, and that delivered the knowing in the plain, direct. This is the answer voice that was the voice of someone who had always known the difference between knowing and guessing, and who had always chosen knowing. 4 of her 5 answers were number 1. Her 5th answer arrived at 17 seconds in Dorothea's voice, the warm, organized, just what you do voice that had been the voice for 31 years, and was number 1. Patricia scored 93 points in the second seat with the 20-year colleague's comprehensive beside her everyday accuracy. Combined total, 288 points, $20,000. Steve Harvey brought the check. He carried it to Dorothea and he stood in front of her and he held it and he said, "A young man in a white coat said, 'I know what you did, Mom. I have always known, and I want you to know that I know.'" He said it in the quiet, recording the account voice. He said, "You listened to me first. For 30 years you listened to me first." He said, "And then patients who did not know you called you to tell you that he listens to them the way he listened to him." He held the check out to her. $20,000 for 31 years of just what you do, and for the 20 years before that, and for the kind of doctor it produced. He said, "He knows what you did." He said it one more time, plainly. "The room knows what you did." He looked at her with the direct, warm, "This is what I want you to have" expression. He said it in a room large enough. The room has it now. Dorothea took the check. She held it with both hands. She looked at it with the same organized, practical, "What is this for" quality she brought to everything. She said, "This goes into a fund for a student who needs what I gave James." She said it in the plain, direct, "This is what it is" for voice. There is a student somewhere who has a mother who is working the second job and who needs what the second job is for. This is going to that student. She looked at Steve Harvey. "That is what James would want." She said it with the warm, "I know my son" quality. He would want the thing to keep going. She said it in the "just what you do" voice that was the voice for everything. "That is what you do with something like this. You keep it going." The room gave her everything it had. Steve Harvey looked at the room and at Dorothea and at Marlene and Patricia and Bernice, and he was in the last 30 seconds and he was going to be in them completely. She said, "That is what you do with something like this. You keep it going." He said it to the room as the record, as the last word on the thing. "Just what you do," he said, "for 30 years and then for whatever comes after 30 years. He looked at Dorothea. "He is going to call you Sunday." She said, "He calls every Sunday." She said it in the warm, "This has always been true" voice. He said, "Tell him the room knows." She said, "He already knows." She said it with the warm, settled, "My son knows things" expression. He called Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey received this with the full, complete, warm laugh of a man who had been found out by the most accurate person in the room. He said, "He did call Steve Harvey." He said it in the warm, "I am accounting for this accurately" voice. He said he was very prepared. Dorothea said, "He is always prepared." She said it with the specific, warm, mother pride quality of someone describing a person they had made. "I taught him that." Steve Harvey said, "You did." He said it in the plain, certain voice. He said, "You did." The episode aired 5 weeks later. The clip spread in 2 simultaneous, eventually converging streams. The first was the turn around, the 2 words, the screen, the white coat, the break room, the prepared young man, the mother's expression when she saw him. The specific mechanism of the surprise, Steve Harvey arranging it, calling James in advance, doing the deliberate thing rather than responding to the unplanned, was noted and shared in the specific. This was organized with care quality of people watching someone use authority correctly, which was the authority to find the room for a thing that had been waiting for a room. Several people wrote about Steve Harvey making the call. Several said, "He listened to Marlene's sentence and he called James. He found the room." That is what someone with his platform can do when they decide to do it right. The second stream was Dorothea's answer when she received the check. "This goes into a fund for a student who needs what I gave James," which spread in the specific. This is the whole thing quality of a sentence that was the summary of everything that had been said in the afternoon. A woman who had done a 20-year project and had not called it a sacrifice, and who, when given $20,000, identified immediately what it was for. The identification was immediate because for Dorothea the purpose was obvious. The thing that had been given was what had been given to James, and the thing was worth giving again, and the $20,000 was the giving again. Several people wrote about the directness of it, the no ceremony, no deliberation. This is what it is for directness of someone who had always known what things were for. Several wrote about the phrase, "Keep it going" specifically, the just what you do quality applied to the prize money, the project extended forward rather than concluded. One wrote, "She received $20,000 and immediately understood it as the next round of the same project." That is what someone looks like who has been in a project for 30 years and who does not think of it as a project but as just what you do. James called on Sunday. He called from the hospital between patients because residency did not fully respect the schedule of Sunday calls, but Dorothea had raised a son who found the 5 minutes regardless. He called and she answered on the second ring, which was how she always answered because she did not keep people waiting. He said, "Did they tell you Steve Harvey called me?" She said, "I figured it out." He said, "It was his idea." She said, "I know, I could tell." He said, "Was it okay?" She said, "It was more than okay." She said, "It was the right room." He said, I thought so too. He said, I found the room. She said, you always find the room. She said, that is something I did not teach you. She said, that is just you. He said, I learned it from watching. She said, watching what? He said, watching you find the room for everything for 30 years. She said, I did not know I was doing that. He said, I know. He said, that is the best kind of doing. She put the phone down after the call and she sat in the chair in the living room and she was in the quiet, complete. The project is not finished, but this part is quality of someone who had been in a project for 30 years and who had in the past week received the account of the project from the person the project was for. She was not done. James was not done. The student who was going to receive the fund was not yet a student, was somewhere being raised by someone who was working the second job, was going to become whatever was possible when the room was made large enough and the work was just what you do. The project continued. Dorothea went to bed. In the morning, she went to the hospital. The claims were on the desk. She sat down and she started. There are moments that Steve Harvey arranges. He had read one sentence in a family's application, and he had made one phone call, and a young man in a break room at Emory had said yes before the sentence was finished. And on a Tuesday, a screen came to life at the back of a game show stage, and a son said, I know what you did, Mom. I have always known. And the room was large enough. And the mother said, I know you know. That is why I did it. And then she said, go see your patients. And then she played Family Feud and won $20,000 and gave it immediately to the next round of the same project. Just what you do for 30 years, and then for whatever comes after 30 years. The room knows. She knows the room knows. He calls every Sunday. She answers on the second ring. The project continues, just what you do. If this story reached you, if you have something you have been trying to say to someone who made you possible, or if someone made you possible and has not heard it from you in the right room, share this today. Leave a comment below and tell us what you're carrying from this story, because this community carries things together and your voice here matters. And subscribe right now if you are not already with us, because every single week we come back with stories exactly like this one. Stories about the sons who find the room. Stories about the mothers who say, go see your patients. And stories about the 20 years that were just what you do and the room that finally held them and the project that keeps going. We will see you in the next one.